we need to move on now to the main story of the day. So the biggest story really is the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is coming here to the People's Republic of Kent today. Not actually here, because he wouldn't be seen dead in my house, but to Dover, which is between here and France, where he's going to tell the whole world that what he's doing to tackle one of his big 5 pledges, stopping the boats of people traffickers who are sending vulnerable people across the channel. So the story right down the bottom right of that page is that there's an Ipsos poll has found half of voters think he's failing on all of this. But he's going to tell us, John, that it's, if you excuse the pun, he's going to say it's all going swimmingly, isn't he?
Yeah, so these are the 5 pledges that Rishi Sunak set out at the start of the year back in January. They were stopping the boats, I'm going to forget them now, halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing the national debt, and also cutting NHS waiting lists.
Well done.
I also did have them written down in front of me in case I forgot them midway through. And so they were these big promises put out by Rishi Sunak. He said, these are the key priorities of a government. This is what we're going to get on with doing. Actually, in the last few months, even though we've had a lot of shouting about all of them, particularly the Stop the Boats one, where we've had all these kind of loud announcements and different rows, there doesn't seem to be massive progress on too many of them. Particularly, you look at the economic ones, growing the economy, which is quite a basic ask. You would hope that any government was trying to grow the economy in some form. But actually, you look at the growth figures that have come out over the last few months, and they've been pretty poor. The economy hasn't been growing at all. It's been flatlining. Instead, we know that inflation is still really high. Anyone who's lucky enough to own their own home but unlucky enough to be renewing their mortgage, i.e. me, knows that mortgage rates are still through the roof. And part of that is because inflation's been rather sticky. The government's found it much harder to bring it down than I think they thought it would be. But yeah, Stop the Boats, you're still seeing thousands of people crossing the channel. This is one of the announcements that Rishi Sunak's very much made his own personal mission. It's not just Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, you see out making all these announcements. It's Rishi Sunak has put himself front and centre of this. He's the one always stood at that lectern, as you saw there, with Stop the Boats in front of it. But aside from all the shouting, we haven't seen massive results so far. We're still seeing thousands of people crossing the channels, making those dangerous crossings and putting their lives at risk. And we expect, as the weather gets nicer in the summer, we are starting to see that to continue, and the numbers continue to go up and up and up.
Exactly. I'd have thought if you're going to make this kind of announcement, you'd do it in the winter when the numbers are going to drop anyway and make you look a bit better. So there are some people coming across now. Now, it's worth pointing out the actual problem with illegal immigration is 25 times, I think, bigger than the number of people coming across the channel. So it is the least important part of any immigration problem, if you think there is one. And added to which, 95%, I think, of people who have come across on those boats that we can find out about have their asylum claims approved. So by and large, they are vulnerable people. By and large, they do have a right to be here. And by and large, they should have had better way of accessing the country to claim asylum, which they have a right to. They haven't got a reception centre or legal routes in which to do it. Misha says, hey, here's a thought. If you want to stop the boats, maybe open official channels for them to use. As I've been saying for years, Misha, a reception centre in Calais, where we used to have a border before Brexit, would be a good idea. Now, John, it's something that the Suella has said, we're going to have some legal routes, but they're not going to do it until they've cut the numbers. How is that?
Yeah, part of the promises they've repeatedly promised to Tory MPs that they will open safe and legal routes, but they haven't set out any details of how they're going to do that. And as your kind of viewer there points out, and as a lot of campaign groups have said, if people don't have an alternative way to coming to this country, then they are going to resort to taking these more dangerous measures, such as crossing the channel.
Yeah, nobody's going to spend 10 grand on a people trafficker if there's a form they can fill in for free, or maybe pay a visa or something, and then go through the process. It's madness to me. Anyway, so he's going to say that it's all going very well today, Rishi is, because he has he's going to be able to say that there are fewer Albanians coming across since they've signed a deal with Albania to deport anyone who turns up. And that's kind of just really, they've just got the message to Albania that they're not welcome. Now, Mike says it's reported Rishi Sunak will tell people today his Stop the Boats initiative is working. Is he taking a page from the Johnson notebook and just making stuff up now? arguably the Albania deal is working, but those who are already here are not being deported. The numbers seem to be very low. And the Tory backbenchers are pretty unhappy about it, aren't they, John? There's not a lot of deportation going on. Ian Duncan Smith is blaming the civil service, just for a change. And the civil service are saying some of these sort of Suella Braverman's policies are illegal, and they just threatening to not do it, full stop.
Yeah, and on this Albania deal, they've got this deal with Albania to deport people back home to Albania. But yesterday, Robert Jenrick, who's the immigration minister, was the designated minister out on the Sunday shows on television, and he seemed to be getting in a bit of a muddle when he was asked about the numbers. How many people exactly have been sent back to Albania so far? And he said it was hundreds, but he was unable to say, well, how many of these people are people who've crossed the channel? How many of these people are criminals who've been in jail and been sent back to Albania? Because that has been the suspicion that a lot of these people going back to Albania, rather than people who'd crossed the channel, they're people who were locked up in jail anyway for committing crimes. And so therefore, it's been a lot easier to deport them. I think the question will be, how much of a deterrent effect does it have? I think the government are going to produce some figures today suggesting that the number of people who are Albanian who are making the crossing has gone down. But you know, they may have tackled that problem slightly, but the overall numbers are still very high. And you look at the asylum backlog, which is the number of people who are waiting to have their asylum claim decided, and that number is still at a record level. And that is why it's costing the government millions and millions of pounds a day in putting people up in hotel accommodation, because they haven't got on with making quick decisions on whether people are allowed to stay in this country or be sent somewhere else. And I think that is one of the big problems. We hear a lot from Tory MPs moaning about how much it's costing to put people up in hotel accommodation. But the reason for that is because the government has been so slow to deal with people's asylum applications. And Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, or the former Home Secretary, was out a couple of weeks ago. And she was saying that when she was in the Home Office and Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, she asked for millions of pounds from the Treasury so that they could turn the asylum system, which part of it's still done on paper forms. She wanted to turn it fully digital. She said this would speed up the kind of application process and help bring the backlog down. And she says Rishi Sunak said no to that money. And so therefore, I think it's quite hard to go from this standing start to suddenly start processing these applications very quickly. And that's why the backlog just keeps growing rather than coming down significantly in size.
Well, let's be honest, though, as well. They don't want an efficient asylum system, the government in this country, because it would be too welcoming, in quote marks. They want everything to be unwelcoming. They genuinely believe that if they make this country more of a crap hole, no one will want to be here. And they're saying stop the boats, because they're implying to the voters, because they think this will work, stop the brown people. And they're not saying stop the traffickers. They're not saying stop the gangs. I mean, they do talk about it now and again. But generally speaking, they're blowing the racist dog whistle. They're getting voters riled up about the people on the boats, as opposed to the people who bought the boats and are fleecing people by putting them in danger. They're not mentioning, they're not analysing barely or recording just how many of people in those boats have a genuine asylum claim. They're not providing them with safe routes. They're complaining about the cost of putting them in hotels, and they're not reversing the basic reason that they're in those hotels, which is a Labour policy, actually, from when David Blunkett was Home Secretary, that stopped asylum seekers working while they were having their claims processed. If they were able to work, they were able to integrate, they could earn money, they could pay tax while their asylum claims were assessed, they wouldn't be in a hotel. But then, they wouldn't be able to blow that dog whistle in the same way. And again, it would be, they could all have jobs, welcoming to asylum seekers. And they don't want to be welcoming. They don't want to be polite. They don't want to be kind. They don't want to look that way. They just want to look as vile as possible to people of a swarthy complexion, because they think that will work with the voters. And that's why he said stop the boats. That's why he's down in Dover. It's like he's personally guarding the white cliffs, saying, you shall not enter here. And it's tripe, isn't it? It's just done for a quick boost in the polls?
Yeah, but I think there is a slight problem in that the government is running out of time. That when they unveiled these 5 pledges at the start of the year, it still seemed like there was quite a bit of time to go before the next election, which we're expecting it could be possibly next May or maybe slightly later, October, November, maybe, seems to be where most people think that the Tories will end up calling the election. And in January, that did feel like that was quite a bit of a way away. But now it is coming closer and closer. It's coming sooner and sooner. And I think the government was hoping that by now in the year, when we're halfway through the year, that they would have made a lot more progress on these priorities than they have so far. And when we were talking about them just now, you just know that things like the economy, things like waiting lists, things like stopping the boats, it just haven't worked out in the way I think the government hoped they would.
No, exactly. So, I mean, these 5 pledges, like we said, what do you think, everybody? How is this going for you? Stopping the boats, still coming. In fact, this summer there's more than ever before. Halving inflation, not happened. Inflation not going down as quickly as we thought. And actually, even if you do halve it, it still means there's inflation and prices are growing. So not helpful. Growing the economy. Cutting debt. Thanks, Liz Truss. And cutting waiting lists. Now, to be fair, I think waiting lists have come down slightly, John, according to Private Eye last time I looked at it. But no one noticed as anything else. Is this the wisest thing for Rishi to have done, to have nailed his colours to this particular mast and say, I'm going to stop these 5 things? Because they're so impossible for him to do in the space of, less than 18 months. He's never going to be able to do it, is he?
But I'm not sure he had much choice, whether you package this up as 5 things or you just end up doing them anyway. Of course, it's always going to be the aim of a government to grow the economy. That is always one of the major things that ministers are trying to do. And so whether you kind of slap a logo on it and a number or whatever, or you just kind of aim to do it behind the closed doors, these are things that the government was going to have to make progress on, regardless of whether they brand it up as 5 priorities or not. People waiting for operations. The government, as you say, have managed to bring down some of the longer waits, but people are still waiting a long time for operations. A lot of those people are in horrific pain waiting for things like hip operations. Then the government was always going to have to make that a priority now, coming out of COVID, to find a way to bring down those numbers. So I'm not sure they had much choice but to kind of set out these priorities and start giving a go at getting through them.
Yeah, perhaps showing that he understands what the concerns are, even if he's not going to be able to tackle them, because he'll just get to the next election and go, look, I haven't had enough time and I can do it. I do get it. But I don't know how that's going to work. So elsewhere on that page, though, on page 2, although we've got a little tiny bit there on the fact that about half of people, according to Ipsos poll, think Rishi Sunak is failing on those pledges. And let me know what you think, everybody. Do you think Rishi's failing, or do you think he's having a good try at it? Do you have some sympathy for him? But elsewhere on that page, we've got all the signs kind of what's gone wrong. So there's a story up, if we can just flash the page up. There's a story up on the top right saying that benefit cuts are pushing children into poverty. There are 600,000, according to Jonathan Ashworth there on the top right, 600,000 extra children put into poverty by the universal credit uplift being cancelled. There's a total of 4.2 million kids now who don't have really enough money to add together. We've got junior doctors down at the bottom threatening to strike 3 days a month. And the revelation in the page lead that austerity is what left the NHS stripped to the bone just at the time the pandemic hit. He cannot. I mean, there's so much stuff that's wrong. It's systemic there, isn't it, John? It's poverty, it's benefits, it's industrial relations, it's the NHS, and the leftovers of the pandemic as well. He's just, I almost feel sorry for him if I didn't know he was jetting around the country on a helicopter every 5 minutes on his own expense.
Yeah, and just remember back to, I think it must be a couple of months now, when things did look slightly up for him. We managed to get some sort of deal on Brexit in Northern Ireland, and he did manage to fix one bit of the NHS strikes. And suddenly all the kind of Tory supporters were saying, oh, he's Mr. Fix-It, he's sorting everything out. But you look at that page and you look at the massive list of problems this country faces at the moment, and you look at the reasons for those problems. So that big article there, the main story on that page, is about austerity and the effect it had on the health service. And the COVID inquiry is going to start up properly next week and start hearing about the preparations that the government made for a pandemic. And there are going to be big questions asked about how much of that austerity that was brought in under David Cameron and George Osborne, how much of an impact did that have on the NHS, which meant that when the pandemic hit, it wasn't able to cope with what it was hit with?
Well, as I can recall, from the start of the pandemic, there was a warehouse full of unusable PPE that had all decayed past the point of use because everyone had run out of money and they couldn't renew it, which was the main thing that caused the problem with austerity. And then we end up spending, 14 billion on about £3 billion worth of PPE because we did it in a rush at the last minute and Matt Hancock was in charge and he was busy doing something else. He was goosing his lady friend. I mean, for goodness sake, do we need an inquiry? We know this stuff. Just boot them all out of the country, right? Let the people traffickers in, take the nice asylum seekers who need some help off the boats, put George Osborne, Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock on the boat, send it back. Go on, off you pop. We'll all be a lot better off. Anyway, I'm going to try and move on to something else because thank you for that, John. And now Mike says we can expect, let us finish the job from Sunak coming up to the general election, no matter how badly the targets are going. That probably is going to be the 3-word slogan, finish the job. It's the job he's done. And the job the Tories have done for the past 13 years, which I suspect will be the problem, be 14 years by then. Anyway, thank you for that.